I do not accept this apology, Camilla, and I believe the crown does not accept it either. Princess Anne's cold, resolute declaration rang out amidst the suffocating atmosphere of the Buckingham Palace small drawing room on the afternoon of the 15th of July 2026, effectively igniting an unprecedented royal upheaval. Right in the presence of King Charles III, who was wearily awaiting a conciliatory nod to put the scandal to rest, Princess Anne bluntly tore away the veneer of diplomatic pretense, rejecting the forced apology and refusing to overlook the true nature of Queen Camilla. Far from a rash outburst, this ruthless yet rational rejection dealt a devastating blow to Camilla's pride. It was a firm declaration of war intended to uphold dynastic discipline, safeguard the legacy of the late Queen Elizabeth II, and re-establish the true order of power behind the palace walls. The king, visibly exhausted, his hands resting heavily on the edge of a writing desk, had spent days negotiating a fragile peace. He was looking for a simple, silent nod of agreement from his sister, a performance of domestic unity that would allow the royal household to move past the disastrous events of the recent state procession rehearsals. Queen Camilla, standing stiffly beside her husband, delivered her apology. It was a statement drafted with the cold precision of palace public relations, delivered in a tone that was audibly reluctant, strained, and devoid of genuine contrition. She apologized for losing her temper and raising her voice in the presence of junior staff during a heated corridor confrontation the week prior. It was a classic royal pivot, an attempt to reduce a massive, calculated grab for institutional power into a mere unfortunate lapse of domestic temper. She did not apologize for the true offense. Her unauthorized, unilateral manipulation of the state procession's order of precedence to elevate her personal favorites and assert her absolute dominance over the bloodline Windsors. The king turned to his sister, expecting the customary royal nod of polite, stoic acceptance. The silence in the room stretched from uncomfortable to agonizing. Princess Anne did not nod. She did not lower her gaze. Standing with the rigid, military posture she inherited from her late father, Prince Philip, and the absolute, quiet authority of her late mother, Queen Elizabeth II, she looked directly into the eyes of the Queen Consort. I do not accept this apology, Camilla. And I believe the crown does not accept it either. The words fell like iron weights onto the polished floor. The king's private secretary reportedly froze mid-breath. King Charles's face pale, his hands visibly trembling as he realized that the carefully constructed facade of his household had just collapsed in front of the very staff whose loyalty keeps the monarchy functioning. This was not an act of sisterly pique or emotional volatility. For those who know Princess Anne, her refusal to accept the apology was a highly calculated, deeply principled stand. Anne was not acting on impulse. She was acting as the self-appointed guardian of the institutional integrity of the British monarchy. In the tense minutes that followed, the Princess Royal systematically dismantled Camilla's apology with surgical, chilling precision. She pointed out that the Queen Consort was not apologizing out of a genuine realization of the damage she had caused to the institution. She was apologizing simply because she had been caught in the act, because her attempt to rewrite royal protocol had failed, and because she had lost the subsequent power struggle when the palace staff instinctively chose the Princess Royal's discipline over the Queen's personal vanity. Anne made it clear that a superficial apology focusing on bad temper was an insult to the intelligence of everyone in the room. It completely ignored the core transgression. Camilla's deliberate, systematic attempt to undermine the established order of precedence, which had not only caused logistical chaos, but had actively humiliated senior members of the royal family who were relegated to lesser positions during the state rehearsal. Anne's voice remained calm, low, and entirely devoid of the theatrical anger that had characterized Camilla's outbursts. This calm only served to make her words more devastating. She looked at her brother, the king, and delivered a warning that will likely define the remainder of his reign. If we accept this falsehood merely to purchase a temporary artificial peace, we are actively deceiving ourselves, Charles. Our mother never, under any circumstances, compromised with a lack of discipline. By directly evoking the memory and the lifelong philosophy of Queen Elizabeth II, Anne did not just reject Camilla's apology. She effectively put her brother's sovereign judgment on trial. She was reminding the king that his primary duty was not to shield his wife's fragile ego from public or private embarrassment, but to defend the dignity of the crown against the corrosive effects of personal whim and domestic favoritism. The room became a pressure cooker of unspoken truths and ancient resentments. The Princess Royal had drawn a line in the sand, demanding that the Queen Consort of the United Kingdom apologize not just for a loud voice, but for a fundamental breach of constitutional and familial duty. She demanded that Camilla apologize to every single member of the family whose positions had been altered, and to every member of the household staff who had been dragged into this toxic civil war. For Camilla, this public rejection, delivered in front of the king and the highest-ranking civil servants of the state, was the ultimate humiliation, a brutal, undeniable reminder that within the walls of Buckingham Palace, the crown she wears does not grant her immunity from the cold, unyielding judgment of the Windsor bloodline. The uncompromising refusal of the Princess Royal to accept the Queen Consort's apology did far more than disrupt a private afternoon meeting. It struck directly at the most fragile element of Camilla's psychological standing within the royal family. For a woman who spent decades navigating the treacherous waters of public disapproval and court skepticism to finally stand beside the king as his crowned consort, the moment was an existential disaster. In those few seconds of icy silence, the glittering facade of Her Majesty dissolved, leaving behind the stark and painful realization that despite her grand title and the heavy crown placed upon her head in Westminster Abbey, she remains, in the eyes of the dynastic core, an outsider. This was the ultimate humiliation, a public demonstration that the blood of the House of Windsor does not recognize her authority when the fundamental principles of the institution are at stake. To fully comprehend the depth of this animosity, one must look beyond the events of yesterday afternoon and examine the long history of passive-aggressive maneuvering that has defined the relationship between these two powerful women. While the public narrative often focuses on Anne's blunt nature and devotion to duty, the private reality is that Camilla has systematically targeted the honor, self-esteem, and standing of the Princess Royal's immediate family. The Queen Consort has frequently used her elevated position to draw sharp distinctions between what she refers to as the direct line of succession and the branches of the family she deems peripheral. In private conversations and planning sessions, Camilla has repeatedly emphasized that Anne's children do not possess royal titles, using this administrative fact as a weapon to diminish their standing at court ceremonies while simultaneously attempting to elevate her own children, Tom Parker Bowles and Laura Lopes, to an unprecedented level of social equivalence with the Prince of Wales. This calculated disrespect toward Anne's family is the fuel that ignited the current firestorm. Camilla has long argued that because her own children are the stepchildren of the king, they should receive a level of deference and public exposure that rivals the sovereign's biological nieces and nephews. She has pushed for her family to be positioned prominently at state banquets and official photographs, arguing that the modern monarchy should reflect a blended family structure. Yet, in doing so, she has shown a profound lack of respect for the sacrifices and deliberate choices made by Princess Anne decades ago. Anne's refusal to allow her children to be pushed to the margins by a stepmother who entered the family much later is not a matter of personal vanity. It is a defense of the historical hierarchy and the genuine public service rendered by her descendants. The irony of Camilla's fixation on titles is that the absence of royal status for Peter Phillips and Zara Tyndall was a deliberate, visionary choice made by Princess Anne and her first husband, Captain Mark Phillips, at the time of their births. When Peter was born, Queen Elizabeth II offered to bestow an earldom upon Captain Phillips, which would have allowed his children to hold the courtesy titles of Lord and Lady and eventually inherit a noble peerage. Anne and her husband politely but firmly declined the sovereign's offer. They recognized that the burden of royal titles would restrict their children's ability to lead independent lives, pursue private careers, and escape the relentless, suffocating scrutiny of the British press. Anne wanted her children to survive and thrive on their own merits, a decision that has been vindicated by history as Peter and Zara have grown into highly respected, successful individuals who maintain an exceptionally close relationship with the British public. Despite their lack of formal HRH styling, the members of Princess Anne's household have cultivated an immense and overwhelmingly positive influence on the reputation of the monarchy. Unlike other branches of the family that have been plagued by financial scandals, public legal battles, and bitter media campaigns, Anne's family represents the epitome of quiet stability. Her husband, Vice Admiral Sir Timothy Lawrence, has served the crown with quiet, flawless devotion for decades, acting as a trusted advisor to the late Queen and a pillar of support for the current king during his recent health struggles. Peter Phillips has established a successful career in sports management and corporate hospitality, representing the family with dignity and avoiding any exploitation of his royal connections. Most notably, Zara Tindall has captured the affection of the nation through her genuine athletic achievements. As an Olympic silver medalist in equestrian sports, Zara achieved global recognition through hard work and discipline rather than inherited privilege. Her down-to-earth demeanor, combined with her marriage to former England rugby captain Mike Tindall, has created a bridge of authentic relatability between the royal family and the modern public. The British people respect them precisely because they do not rely on taxpayers' funds or demand royal deference, yet they remain steadfastly loyal to the crown. For Camilla to suggest that these individuals are somehow lesser because they lack the formal titles she fought so desperately to obtain is a distortion of reality that Princess Anne was never going to tolerate. Yesterday, that toleration officially reached its end. The true motivation behind the uncompromising stance of the Princess Royal is not merely rooted in past grievances or personal pride, but in a fiercely protective maternal instinct aimed at safeguarding the future of her family's newest member. At the heart of this quiet war is Harriet, the newly wedded daughter-in-law of Princess Anne. For Anne, the confrontation in the small drawing room was a preemptive strike to prevent the systemic marginalization of Harriet before her royal career could even begin. If Anne were to yield to Camilla's demands and accept a superficial apology, it would signal a dangerous surrender of her family's domestic sovereignty. Such a retreat would give the Queen Consort a green light to continue her relentless campaign of administrative oppression, pushing Harriet to the absolute margins of royal life. The stakes are incredibly high because Harriet and her husband, have recently stepped forward to accept with Catherine, the Princess of Wales, temporarily reducing her public engagements to focus on her health. The palace administration desperately needed reliable, scandal-free figures to step into the breach. Harriet, possessing an innate grace and an exceptional work ethic that mirrors her mother-in-law, was the natural choice to represent the crown. She was asked to assume temporary patronage and public representation for several critical social and medical organizations that were previously championed by Catherine. This development directly threatened the territory that Queen Camilla has spent decades trying to monopolize. For nearly 20 years, Camilla has worked tirelessly to build a public portfolio focused on literacy, domestic abuse support, and specific health initiatives to soften her public image and earn the respect of the British public. The sudden emergence of Harriet, a young, charismatic, and highly capable woman representing the direct lineage of the late Queen, has created intense insecurity within the Queen Consort's office. If Princess Anne were to compromise her family's standing now, Harriet would find herself entirely defenseless against Camilla's behind-the-scenes maneuvers. Anne knows that a defeat in the drawing room would force Harriet to constantly yield to the Queen Consort during public engagements, allowing Camilla to overshadow her work and dictate her public schedule. The rivalry is particularly acute in the critical areas of public health and child development, where the patronages of the Princess of Wales, now represented by Harriet, directly overlap with Camilla's own initiatives. Consider the fragile balance of royal patronages. Catherine has long championed organizations like Action on Addiction and the Anna Freud Center, which focus on mental health, early childhood intervention, and addiction recovery. Simultaneously, Camilla has sought to dominate the healthcare narrative through her presidency of the Royal Osteoporosis Society and her active promotion of physical well-being. Furthermore, while Catherine's work with the Royal Foundation Center for Early Childhood has been hailed as groundbreaking, Camilla has attempted to carve out her own legacy in the same demographic through the National Literacy Trust, seeking to position herself as the premier champion of youth education. By allowing Harriet to represent Catherine's interests in these identical social sectors, the palace has set up an inevitable collision of influence. If Camilla successfully asserts her authority over Anne, she will undoubtedly demand that Harriet defer to her senior status at joint engagements, effectively neutering the young ambassador's impact. Anne refuses to allow her daughter-in-law to be sacrificed on the altar of Camilla's insecurity. For the Princess Royal, protecting Harriet is not just about family loyalty. It is about ensuring that the next generation of working royals can perform their duties with dignity, free from the toxic interference of a stepmother determined to establish an absolute monopoly on royal favor. The silent war between the Princess Royal and the Queen Consort is not merely a domestic dispute fought behind heavy palace doors. It is a strategic battle for the very soul and public image of the modern British monarchy. To understand why Princess Anne chose this moment to mount such an uncompromising defense of her family, one must analyze the complex landscape of royal patronages and social advocacy. In the 21st century, a royal family's legitimacy is no longer derived solely from ancient bloodlines or constitutional tradition. It is earned daily through visible, impactful service to the public. For decades, the Queen Consort has worked tirelessly to transform her public perception from that of a controversial figure into a respected, indispensable matriarch by championing sensitive and highly profile social causes. However, the introduction of Harriet, the dynamic new daughter-in-law of Princess Anne, into this exact public arena has threatened to dismantle Camilla's hard-won monopoly on public affection. With the Princess of Wales, Catherine, currently limiting her public appearances due to her ongoing recovery, the royal family faced a severe deficit of youthful energy and public engagement. In response to this institutional crisis, Harriet and her husband were quietly approached by the king and senior advisors to step forward, taking on the mantle of royal ambassadors. Crucially, Harriet was designated to represent Catherine at several key events and within specific charitable sectors. This temporary transition of duties was designed to maintain the continuity of the Crown's support for vital medical and social organizations. Yet, this strategic move placed Harriet directly on a collision course with the Queen Consort, who has spent the last 20 years positioning herself as the primary champion of the very same causes. The overlapping domains of public service between the established Queen Consort and the newly elevated Harriet are striking and highly volatile. For instance, in the crucial sector of healthcare and mental well-being, Catherine has long been the patron of groundbreaking organizations such as Action on Addiction and the Anna Freud Center for Children and Families. When Harriet stepped forward to represent these charities at recent official gatherings, she did so with a natural warmth and modern sensibility that immediately captured the media's attention. This instant popularity deeply unsettled the Queen Consort's camp. Camilla has long sought to project herself as the preeminent figure in royal medical advocacy through her dedicated work with the Royal Osteoporosis Society. The sudden emergence of Harriet, performing high-profile work in the related fields of addiction recovery and mental health, threatened to overshadow Camilla's long-term efforts and dilute her exclusive hold on the public's appreciation for royal healthcare initiatives. Furthermore, a similar friction has developed in the realm of educational and literacy initiatives. The Princess of Wales's landmark work with the Royal Foundation's Centre for Early Childhood has been a cornerstone of modern royal service, focusing on the critical importance of a child's early years. As Harriet began to represent these early childhood development programs at regional conferences and educational forums, her presence directly competed with Camilla's cherished patronage of the National Literacy Trust. Camilla has always viewed her literacy work as her signature contribution to the nation's youth. The sight of a younger, highly relatable member of the Princess Royal's family championing early childhood education alongside her own literacy drives has created an unspoken but fierce rivalry for public attention and media coverage. Finally, the clash is most visible in the delicate area of supporting vulnerable women and families. Catherine's patronage of East Anglia's children's hospices has long highlighted the emotional and physical support required by families in crisis. When Harriet began visiting these facilities on behalf of the Princess of Wales, her empathetic interactions were widely praised. This directly mirrored the space that Camilla has attempted to carve out for herself through her long-standing and admirable support of Safe Lives, a charity dedicated to ending domestic abuse against women. With both women operating in the sensitive space of family support and female empowerment, the potential for public comparison became inevitable. If Princess Anne had accepted Camilla's superficial apology yesterday in the small drawing room, she would have effectively signaling that her family was willing to accept a secondary status in these public endeavors. A surrender by Anne would have allowed Camilla's office to dictate the scheduling, prominence, and scope of Harriet's public engagements on behalf of Catherine. It would have allowed the Queen Consort to systematically push Harriet to the margins, ensuring that Camilla remained the dominant female face of royal charity during Catherine's absence. Anne's total refusal to Nuremberg yesterday was a masterstroke of maternal and institutional protection. She ensured that Harriet's position remains independent, secure, and entirely free from the territorial interference of an insecure queen consort who views every rising star as a threat to her own hard-won crown. The uncompromising stance taken by the Princess Royal in the small drawing room of Buckingham Palace has left King Charles III in the most agonizing and precarious position of his entire reign. For a monarch who has spent his first few years on the throne striving to project an image of stability, continuity, and calm to a watchful nation, yesterday's dramatic collapse of the family accord represents a catastrophic failure of domestic diplomacy. Charles did not enter that room expecting a historic constitutional showdown. He entered as a weary brother and a protective husband, hoping to quietly sweep a highly embarrassing incident under the royal carpet. Instead, he found himself trapped between the two most influential women in his life, forced to choose between the emotional security of his wife and the unyielding institutional discipline of his sister. The king's predicament is deeply complex and intensely painful. On a personal level, Charles is fiercely devoted to Queen Camilla. He spent decades fighting against the resistance of the British public, the government, and his own family to ensure that the woman he loved would not only be accepted but would eventually be crowned as his queen consort. To witness her being publicly humiliated, her apology rejected as a hollow performance of contrition, and her authority openly questioned by his own sister is a bitter pill for the sovereign to swallow. Charles knows that Camilla's insecurities are deep-seated, born from years of being treated as an outsider by the court establishment. His natural instinct as a husband is to shield her from the cold, dismissive judgment of the old guard. Yet, as king, Charles is acutely aware that he cannot afford to govern the House of Windsor through personal sentiment alone. The Princess Royal possesses an immense, almost untouchable leverage over the current administration. Anne is widely regarded by the British public and the palace machinery as the hardest-working, most reliable, and most disciplined member of the royal family. She represents the direct link to the flawless work ethic of their late mother, Queen Elizabeth II. If Charles were to openly side with his wife and punish his sister for her defiance, he would alienate the very core of his institutional support. The senior courtiers, the household staff, and the public would view such a move as a betrayal of the late Queen's legacy and a dangerous surrender to domestic favoritism. Faced with this reality, the king has been forced into a humiliating capitulation. To prevent a total breakdown of the palace hierarchy, Charles had no choice but to yield to the immense pressure exerted by the Princess Royal. He had to acknowledge that Camilla's initial attempt to rewrite the rules of precedence during the state rehearsals was a grave error of judgment that threatened the dignity of the crown. By refusing to force Anne's hand and by allowing her devastating rejection of Camilla's apology to stand, the king has signaled that even the sovereign must bow to the unyielding demands of institutional discipline. This silent concession has left the monarch isolated, proving that within the walls of his own palace, the cold calculations of duty will always override the warmth of marital devotion. The aftermath of the dramatic confrontation in the small drawing room of Buckingham Palace has left the British monarchy in a state of quiet but profound transition. The dust from yesterday's explosion has settled, but the structural foundations of the court have been permanently altered. King Charles III, trapped in the agonizing vice of his dual roles as a protective husband and a constitutional sovereign, has been forced to make the most difficult concession of his reign. To prevent the complete fracturing of his household and to preserve the loyalty of the old guard who view the Princess Royal as the true standard-bearer of the late Queen's legacy, the king has issued a series of quiet but devastating directives that represent a total institutional surrender to his sister. The primary and most consequential outcome of this crisis is the complete, non-negotiable restoration of the traditional order of precedence. The king has signed an official sovereign decree establishing that the Princess Royal will have absolute, final authority over the planning, organization, and execution of all ceremonial aspects of future state events. This decision effectively strips the queen consort of any administrative influence over the logistics of the court, ensuring that her personal preferences can never again interfere with established historical protocol. The staff of the Lord Chamberlain's office and the Master of the Household have been formally instructed to report directly to Princess Anne on all matters concerning the physical arrangement and procession orders of royal family, members at state banquets, diplomatic receptions, and official processions. Furthermore, the king has mandated a secondary, far more personal humiliation for his wife. Queen Camilla is now required to deliver a second, comprehensive apology. This apology cannot be delivered as a mere formality or disguised as an unfortunate misunderstanding regarding staff relations. The new directive dictates that the Queen Consort must explicitly apologize to the Princess Royal, to the immediate members of Princess Anne's household, and to the wider family for her unauthorized actions during the state rehearsal. She must formally acknowledge that her attempts to alter the procession order were inappropriate, disrespectful to the history of the institution, and damaging to the unity of the family. This apology must be delivered in a private but highly structured meeting, witnessed once again by the king and his most senior administrative advisors, ensuring that the record of her submission is officially preserved in the palace archives. Crucially, this resolution secures the future standing of the younger generation of the family, particularly Princess Anne's new daughter-in-law, Harriet. By establishing her absolute control over the ceremonial machinery of the palace, Princess Anne has created a protective shield around Harriet's rising public profile. The Queen Consort's office will no longer possess the administrative leverage required to interfere with Harriet's engagements or attempt to overshadow her work on behalf of the Princess of Wales. The various charitable sectors of healthcare, education, and family support will now be managed with strict administrative boundaries, preventing Camilla's team from manipulating schedules or press coverage to the detriment of the younger royals. Harriet is now free to develop her vital role as a modern royal ambassador with the full, unyielding backing of the Princess Royal's office. This extraordinary episode has demonstrated a timeless truth about the British monarchy. The power of the crown does not reside solely in the hands of the person who wears the sovereign's ring, nor does it belong to the person who shares the sovereign's bed. True power within the House of Windsor is earned through decades of silent, unwavering devotion to the principle of duty over desire. By standing her ground in the small drawing room, Princess Anne did not merely win a domestic argument. She defended the very essence of the institution she has served her entire life. She reminded her brother, her sister-in-law, and the entire nation that the survival of the monarchy depends entirely on its adherence to discipline, tradition, and selflessness. As the court adjusts to this new reality, the message from the Princess Royal remains clear. The personal vanity of individuals will always be crushed by the cold, magnificent weight of the crown.